On this episode of the CJ Sweat Show, we've got Mike McDaniel coming on in about 30 minutes to join us. We're going to talk Jimbo Fisher. We're going to talk FSU football. We're going to talk Texas A&M. By the way, Virginia Tech fans absolutely should be worried right now, so we're going to get into a lot of that as well. I've got a story about Nick Saban, and you're absolutely not going to believe it. It will blow your mind when you hear it, but I looked it up this afternoon. It's absolutely true, so we're going to get into that. Tennessee fans have completely gone crazy, and there's so much more to get to. This is the CJ Sweat Show. We start right now. I'm not bringing the bias here. You are.
What they do up there? Brainwash them?
Hey, it's not my fault that your team is terrible.
Let me speak. No, there is too much. Let me stop.
This is just honest. I'm sorry if it hurts. Oh wait, I'm not really sorry.
Put that coffee down. You can't stop!
Can't stop, won't stop. Where the brakes at?
This is the CJ Sweat Show. We are now live and brought to you out of Roanoke, Virginia from our good people over at Byers Auto. I want to thank you all for joining us, taking busy time out of your evening to be a part of our podcast as you're driving around today. Some of you listen to me. I know you listen to me as you're working out at the gym. Some of you have me on dinner, have me on while you're eating dinner. And I know one person a couple weeks ago had us on in their living room. Literally, were live streaming us through their TV. Before I get into today's podcast, I just want to thank you guys so much for even listening to me. I think so often in podcasting, radio, whatever, you all who listen don't get enough thanks, and I really should be thanking all of you for making me a part of your evening. It is an absolute honor to be here. We are jam-packed with so many different things that I want to get to. I told you in the opening, I've got a story about Nick Saban. You absolutely will not believe it. It will absolutely blow your mind. But I looked it up. It is true. So we're going to get to that a little later. Again, thank you for joining us. I want to start off with this. Tennessee fans lost their mind over the weekend, and you all know the story. So I'm not going to give you the take every other sports host has given you. Instead, we're going to break down the reaction from Tennessee fans. We're going to break down the reaction from Greg Schiano supporters. We're going to break down reactions from the media, and I'm going to tell you what is pretend, what you think is true, what you're being told is true, and what the reality of the situation is. Are you ready? Let's buckle up and let's go. So first pretend statement is Tennessee fans are lying to you and saying they didn't want Greg Schiano because of his association with the Penn State scandal. Here's the reality. Tennessee didn't want Greg Schiano because Tennessee fans look at Greg Schiano and think he's an average coach, because quite frankly, he is an average coach. And the real issue for Tennessee fans is that Greg Schiano reminds Tennessee fans of Butch Jones. He is gym rat. He is control freak. He is not very exciting on offense to watch. He doesn't have elaborate offensive game plans. He's a defensive-minded guy. He recruits well, but he really doesn't win big games. And besides one really nice season at Rutgers, Greg Schiano really hasn't had much of a career. Now, Ohio State fans and some media members, they think that's absolutely crazy. And they have responded with, Greg Schiano's a great coach. The reality is Greg Schiano isn't bad, but he's not a high-profile coach. Besides one really stellar year at Rutgers, he's been slightly above average his entire career. And I understand Tennessee fans being upset over the weekend with the potential hire of Greg Schiano. Because Tennessee's looking around and they're like, Florida at least got an interview with Chip Kelly. Florida's going to get Dan Mullen. We wanted Dan Mullen. Well, you didn't get Dan Mullen. You didn't get Chip Kelly. Chip Kelly didn't even give you an interview. He wouldn't give you the time of day. So they're looking around, they're going, Florida's getting Dan Mullen, UCLA is going to get Chip Kelly, and we're sitting here really insecure because we're now about to get Greg Schiano. And Tennessee fans, they know they came to the bar and they didn't get the hottest girl. They didn't get the second hottest girl. And they don't know for sure that they're walking away with the third hottest girl. And so now they're becoming a little insecure. And by the way, I don't have any issue with fans who want to voice their displeasure. You as a fan should be able to do that. And any media member that tells you otherwise is absolutely ridiculous. Here's the other statement I heard this weekend I thought was crazy. Is that Greg Schiano's career was ruined by Tennessee fans. This one to me was the most ridiculous one of them all. Greg Schiano is still the coach. He's still the defensive coordinator at Ohio State. How can your career be ruined if literally you had the same job you had before the incident? Before Tennessee fans got all upset, you were the defensive coordinator for Ohio State. After they got upset, you're still the defensive coordinator. By the way, any other program could take a chance on him if they wanted to, but you don't see Florida going after him. You don't see even Arizona State going after him. Why don't they hire him? Why doesn't Arizona State hire him? Texas A&M's got an opening. Why don't they go after him? UCLA didn't give him a chance. Why not? They didn't even give him an interview. Because Greg Schiano's not a high-profile coach. His career wasn't ruined by Tennessee fans. I can tell you this. If Greg Schiano were given any job right now in the country, any job, let's just say Arizona State comes out tomorrow and they're going to hire Greg Schiano. And let's just say the thing with Tennessee didn't happen. What happened at Penn State would have resurfaced. In this day and age, look at what happened today at NBC. Matt Lauer fired for sexual assault. We've had about one of those a week. Big time celebrities, Kevin Spacey, Matt Lauer, getting fired. And I'm not saying they shouldn't be. That should be the case. If that comes out, you absolutely should be fired. But this idea that Tennessee fans are to blame for Greg Schiano's career is not the case. And this is the thing people just cannot seem to grasp for whatever reason. And I've been preaching on this for years now. Just because our legal system finds you innocent or finds you not guilty doesn't mean you're innocent. Our legal system is designed to, we aren't going to punish you through the legal system unless we can prove without a shadow of a doubt that you're guilty. Anytime somebody's arrested, even then, innocence, they are still considered innocent. They are not considered guilty. You can arrest with probable cause, but they are not considered guilty until they have gone through the legal system. Okay? But just because the legal system says you're not guilty doesn't mean the court of public opinion, us, can't find you guilty. And it doesn't mean you didn't do it. So this idea that Greg Schiano is absolutely innocent, you can't claim that either. You can claim from a legal standpoint there wasn't enough evidence there to prove he had something to do with it, but you can't tell me Greg Schiano is completely innocent of what happened and what he's accused of. The other one that I'm hearing today, and this one isn't as relevant now because I swear this Tennessee situation is about the most ridiculous one. 5 hours ago, I'm hearing Jeff Brom, coach at Purdue, is going to get this job, and then it's like as I'm prepping for the show, all of a sudden they've completely botched the situation. This is who John Curry, the athletic director, wanted to hire. And then all of a sudden, someone up the food chain in Tennessee came down and said, no, we're not going to hire Jeff, or we're not going to pay Jeff Brom that salary. We'll come back with this. John Curry went to Jeff Brom, offered him that, and then he declined it. So now this isn't even really relevant. But the other thing I heard when that was taking place is that Jeff Brom's going to be a great coach at Tennessee. The reality is no, he's not. The reality is Tennessee fans, this is what you're left with. You wanted Gruden, he said no. You wanted Chip Kelly, he wouldn't even grant you the interview. You wanted David Cutcliffe, the coach at Duke, who's 63 years old. He wouldn't grant you an interview. You wanted Scott Frost, Not interested. You wanted Mike Gundy. He used and abused you. You can't tell me that Jeff Brom is a great hire when he was at best 6th on your list and now is telling you no. Like this idea, like I like the Tennessee program and I wish Tennessee would return to glory. But this idea that right now you Tennessee are viewed as this elite upper echelon program right now is just simply not true. If Oregon opened tomorrow, that would be a more desirable job to coaches. Texas A&M right now is a more desirable job. Like, you are not very high on anybody's totem pole. And Tennessee fans, I'm totally for. If you want to voice your opinion, you want to use whatever leverage you have to try and run Greg Schiano out of town. But if you do that, you had better be prepared for the consequences, because there are consequences. And that is Greg Schiano is very well liked in these coaching circles. And now a lot of coaches do not view you as an upper tier job. So I saw that. I thought that was one of the crazier stories of the weekend. The next story, and this one came out yesterday and has really picked up some steam today, is the New York Giants. By the way, we've got Mike McDaniel in about 15 minutes here. Excited to bring him on. We're talking Jimbo Fisher, a lot of good things. But the New York Giants have now benched Eli Manning, and they're going to start on Sunday Geno Smith. And so like everybody's freaking out because anytime people see this type of move, they immediately start saying, oh, Eli Manning's not as good as Geno Smith. Eli Manning isn't as talented as Geno Smith. Nobody's saying he is. Eli Manning's getting benched for one reason and one reason only. And that is the Giants now know they have no shot at playoffs. They have absolutely none. So what's the point in winning if you're a Giants fan now? If you're a Giants fan, the next step in the process is get a good draft pick. That is your next step. And that's what the Giants' plan is. That's why they're putting Eli on the bench. Because the Giants coaches know Geno Smith isn't going to win us a game. So they came out a few days ago and said, we want to find the next Eli Manning. That means we're now going to shift into draft mode. That's where the Giants are. But there are some quarterbacks who wouldn't be benched for that and who would have enough leverage to do that. Tom Brady, for one. Look back at what Tom Brady did earlier in the year. He convinced the Patriots, the one organization that is notorious for trading away legendary players once they in their prime, he convinced them to trade away both of their valuable quarterback options. Brady has taken, the reason Brady can do that and Eli can't is because Brady has taken multiple pay cuts so that the Patriots can get elite talent on that roster. Want to know why they can sign Brandon Cooks? Is because Tom Brady doesn't get paid as the highest quarterback in the league. So that's why the Patriots can sign guys like that. Eli Manning, for the record, Eli Manning just a few years ago signed a $97.5 million deal. He is now on a 4-year contract worth $84 million a year. And I'm totally fine if you're a super talented player and you've got all this leverage and you've had all the success and you won a couple Super Bowls, if you want to use that to get yours. But understand, when you have a get mine mentality, the organization that you play for, that you work for, is also entitled to a get mine personality, get mine mentality. They're entitled to the same thing. You aren't, just because you've played and you've done really well, doesn't mean you get the sole ownership of that mentality. Now the Giants can come out and say, well, we're going to plan for Josh Rosen. We're going to plan for Sam Darnold. And the other story that's out right now is that the 49ers are going to start Garoppolo. So the Giants here, 49ers are starting Garoppolo. That means the Niners likely win a couple games, hence moving down in the draft order. And the Giants are going to win a couple games, move up in the draft, going to lose a couple games and move up in the draft order. So the Giants looked at this and they're like, we can go get an elite level quarterback. And the Giants also know Carson Wentz, he's here to stay. Carson Wentz isn't going anywhere. Carson Wentz has been absolutely incredible. So they know they're going to have to play Carson Wentz twice a year. They know they're going to have to play Dak Prescott and Ezekiel Elliott twice a year. And the Redskins, either are going to sign Kirk Cousins, and that's going to be tough to play against twice a year, or the Redskins are going to go out and get a guy of their own, and they're going to trade up, and they're going to get a Sam Darnold, a Josh Rosen, or Josh Allen. So the Giants are looking at this like, we could be in 2 years the only team in this division without an elite quarterback. And that scares the heck out of the Giants administration. Giants don't want to have anything to do with that. Their front office looks at this as a transaction. We're now going to bench Eli Manning because we're going to move up the draft order. It's not emotional. It's not about stats. It's not about hurting Eli's feelings. It's not a dig at Eli. It's none of that. It is the Giants look at this as wanting to move up the draft order. That's all this is. All right, so we're a few minutes. We've got Mike McDaniel coming on to talk about Jimbo Fisher leaving Florida State to take this job at Texas A&M. It is like unofficially a done deal at this point. Like, this is going to happen. So what the interesting thing about that, and the story that's flown under the radar for the past 24 hours, is that Florida State is now going to be open, and Florida State's going to have their pick of a coach. I believe Florida State is one of the best jobs in the country. To me, Florida and Florida State are two incredibly underrated jobs because they're elite programs. Both of them are completely dedicated to winning at football. They're going to invest a bunch of money into their programs, and Florida is a hotbed, an absolute hotbed for recruits. So Florida State's going to put all this money and they're going to give you all these resources. They're going to pay your coordinators. You can go get whoever you want as your coordinator, and you can recruit whoever you want. So I think Florida State's a great job. And what I think is going to happen is Florida State, I think, is going to go out and hire a really, really good coach. And the one name I'm going to throw out there is going to blow your mind. And it's going to make sense once I explain all of it, so bear with me. Florida State should go after Nick Saban. And I know it sounds crazy, but Florida State's already rumored that they may pay their next coach $11.5 million a year. Nick Saban's current salary, I'm looking at it now, he gets paid $11.1. He can get a $700,000 bonus. It's not, again, if you're paying $11.5 million a year, you can get Nick Saban on the phone. So they're looking at doing that. Now, that sounds crazy. People are saying, well, why would Nick Saban want to leave Alabama? Well, first of all, it has been well reported you can get Nick Saban on the phone for a certain dollar. You can get him on the phone. He interviewed for the Texas job. He's considered going back into the NFL. Like, the idea that Nick Saban is Alabama for life, although it may feel that way, that's not the case. So the interesting thing that I saw today that I think maybe gives this some legs is, like, Nick Saban for 7 consecutive years had the number one class. Through 2017, Nick Saban had the number one recruiting class in the country. It didn't alter. It wasn't number 2, number 3, number 4. The number one class in the country belonged to Nick Saban from 2011 through 2017. That was the streak he was on. 2018, which that recruiting period is basically over. We've got the National Letter of Intent Day. And then that's when everybody's going to write their letters. The fax machines come back to life for one day throughout the year. But most of it is over. And Alabama's not ranked number 1 in 2018. It's the first time in 7 years they're not going to be ranked number 1. They're not in the top 5. They're not in the top 10. They're not in the top 15. They're not in the top 20. Do you want to know where Alabama ranks for 2018 in recruiting? 24th. 2019, which we've got a lot of time left in that one, they sit at 9th. You're not first, where they've been for 7 straight years. Not in the top 5, barely in the top 10, at 9th. And they don't have a 5-star recruit yet for 2018. They don't. You want to know who's consistent throughout these lists? Florida State, they're in the top 10, almost always in the top 5. Ohio State's in the top 5 every single year so far. Penn State's now getting up there. Georgia's in the top 5 every year now with Kirby Smart. Oregon's now in the top 10 on both of these lists. BYU for 2018 actually sits at 6th. 2019 sits at 6th. Nick Saban in Alabama, this thing is about to come to a crashing halt. And it is starting with this year. it is starting with that loss at Auburn that you saw this past weekend. So, like, this idea right now with Nick Saban that he is glued to Alabama, I don't think is true. I think you're going to recruit better at Florida State. They're going to pay you more. They're going to give you more opportunity to win. They're going to spend more on recruiting than Alabama will. They will go all in. Nick Saban's got maybe 8 years left of coaching if he wants it. And I think you could win 3 or 4 more titles. And Nick Saban, we all consider him the best college football coach of all time, right? Like, that's pretty well documented. Like, you can maybe make an argument Barry Bryant was really, really good. Lou Holtz, incredible. We could go on and on and on. There's been some great college football coaches. Nick Saban, I think, is the best. But if Nick Saban were to go to Florida State, and if he were to win multiple national championships, and then he's going to have multiple championships with LSU, Alabama, Florida State, that's 3 different programs, I think he would not only be the greatest college football coach of all time, I think he'd be the best coach. NFL, college, NBA, college basketball, any sport across the board, I think Nick Saban would be the most accomplished coach in sports history if you were to go to Florida State and win. And I think that has a little bit of legs. And it's not being discussed. I don't know that Florida State's interviewing him. I don't know that there's been any discussion. But I can guarantee you this, based off of what Texas has done, based off of what NFL teams have done, if you call Nick Saban's agent and you say, we're willing to offer Nick $10.5 million a year, you can get him on the phone. Okay. I'm losing my voice, by the way. I don't know where that's going. I need Chris. Chris is not here today, my co-host. And, it's interesting because Chris and I play each other in fantasy football this weekend. And the last time we did that, Chris had to come in to the podcast wearing a Redskins jersey of a former Duke player and had to wear a Duke hat. And Chris is a Cowboys fan and a Kentucky fan. So Chris isn't here today. We play each other this weekend in fantasy. Again, the winner this time gets into the playoffs and the loser does not. Like, that game is to get into playoffs. So all is on the line, Chris. And Chris Mason, if I win, there's going to be hell to pay. And I can tell you this, you're going to enter at a completely new level if I beat you again for not being here tonight. Y'all make sure in the chat there in Facebook to give Chris some crap. By the way, a couple of things to talk about. So in Twitter, there is a poll going on. You can vote in this. Go to Twitter, the CJ Sweat Show Twitter, and you can vote in this poll. I asked this question of who should be the Tennessee Volunteers' next head coach. And there is breaking news right now of who Tennessee fans think should be their next head coach. And I'm not making this up. You can go to Twitter, look for CJ Sweat Show. You can vote, and you can see this poll. The majority of Tennessee fans, 28% of them, they had the option of Lane Kiffin, T. Martin, Jeff Brom, or CJ Sweat, me, your host. Tennessee fans, 28% of them voted for me. I lead those 4. I am 1% ahead of Lane Kiffin and T. Martin. So listen, if you want me to be the next head coach of Tennessee, better go on to Twitter and make sure you vote in that poll. We had another poll going on Facebook as well about the college football playoff. We're going to get into this in just a minute. So the college football playoff rankings come out, and the more we review the top 10 again, Clemson 1, Auburn 2, Oklahoma 3, Wisconsin 4, Alabama 5, Georgia 6th, Miami 7th, Ohio State 8th, Penn State is 9th, USC is 10th. So I put this poll up because it looks like to me that last spot could be between Wisconsin or it could be Alabama. And right now, between the poll going on Facebook, you can vote in this one too. Go to our website, facebook.com/CJ Sweat Show. It is a 50-50 tie. 50% on each on whether or not Alabama or Wisconsin will get into the college football playoff with that last spot. Everybody's freaking out about these rankings, by the way. I didn't have any issue with the rankings last night, like none whatsoever. I had one issue. That was with Wisconsin. Wisconsin should not be 4th. Other than that, I'm fine. But what I'm getting at is Clemson. Everybody's like, but Clemson lost to Syracuse. The committee is not being held to one game, and you shouldn't either. It is one game on a Friday night on the road at Syracuse. They play in a dome, and you're without your quarterback, Kelly Bryant. I swear I've said this for now, 6 straight weeks, ever since that loss happened. It's not a big deal. Clemson won't be defined by it. The committee's not defining them by it. They're saying they went up there, they've got a really good excuse, and the game, by the way, came down to the final possession. Clemson could have won that game. And if Clemson won that game 28-24, guess what? Nobody's talking about it right now. So you're telling me because of the final minute of a weird game, Clemson shouldn't be number one. No, they should be. They just went this past weekend on the road to South Carolina and destroyed them. I mean, South Carolina had no shot in that game, and it was evident early. Clemson won that game 34-10. Clemson beat Auburn earlier in the year. Auburn is ranked second. Now, I think you could put Oklahoma at 2 and Auburn at 3. If you wanted to switch those, I would be fine with that. Wisconsin, I would have at 6th, and at 4th, I would have... At 4th, I tell you what, here's where I would have at 4th. And people are going to go crazy about this. I'd have Penn State at 4th. I do not understand for the life of me why Penn State is not in this discussion at all. I don't get it. Penn State has 2 losses. At Michigan State by 3, at Ohio State by 1. They've lost 2 games to ranked opponents, one in the playoff discussion, by a combined 4 points. And you're telling me Penn State doesn't belong in the discussion? Auburn lost to LSU. And I think Auburn right now is playing exceptional football. But Auburn's resume isn't that much better than Penn State. So I would have Penn State, honestly, at 4. I'd have Alabama at 5. Wisconsin I'd have at 6. And Georgia a close 7th. That would be my top 7. Here's how I look at things. I look at things as, how I think you would play today. And if I think Clemson would beat Auburn, which I think they would, I would have Clemson 1. I think Oklahoma would beat Auburn, so I'd have Oklahoma 2. I think Auburn would beat the 4th place team. That's just how I do it. That's how I would vote. All right, so we are going to take a break. On the other side of this break, we have Mike McDaniel from Inside the ACC coming on. He's going to give us some interesting news about the Jimbo Fisher situation. Hang tight. We're going to get Mike on the phone. This is the CJ Sweat Show. We'll be right back. Hey, it's your favorite redhead, CJ. I'm sure by now you've heard my opening rant, CJ Thoughts. Well, let me give you my thoughts on the car buying process. If you're like me, when you go to buy a car, you just want to find something reliable with decent payments. I'm not talking about going to the local guy down the street looking to make a quick sell. Buyers Auto has been around for over 100 years. And they're going to take time to ensure you're buying a car specifically fit for your needs. That's why I'll trust Buyers Auto with the purchase of my next car. Buy your auto from Buyers Auto. Back live, CJ Sweat Show. Appreciate you guys letting me take that break. I needed water. I've carried the first 30 minutes of the show without my co-host tonight. So I am, my voice, a little dry tonight. A little dry. Been a little tough. Joining me now from InsideTheACC.com is my good friend Mike McDaniel. Mike, thank you for being on the podcast tonight. How are you?
What's going on, CJ? How are you, man?
I'm good. Listen, we got ACC championship coming up. It's Clemson versus Miami. Now, you've been a bit of a Miami hater this year. What's up with that?
yeah, that's me, man. The Miami hater. I don't know. I mean, I look at Miami, and they beat a couple really good teams, and then they lay a couple eggs and escape some games that, maybe they shouldn't have escaped. I mean, the Florida State game comes to mind. They played a close game with Syracuse. Obviously, a miracle catch against Georgia Tech keeps them from losing that game. Obviously, dropped the season finale to Pitt. So, as good as Miami is and as talented as Miami is, there were just some red flags that they drew for a majority of the season that made me wonder if this team was 1,000% locked in or if they were just trying to get by on talent alone. But this is a super talented roster, top to bottom, and it's only going to get better under Mark Richt.
No, I think you're absolutely right. And, the funny thing about Miami was we did a preseason ranking at the start of the year, and I picked Miami to finish fourth. I thought they would get into the playoff. But my thing with Miami was I thought they would start off not as good as they would finish. And it's like, for whatever reason, every week besides the Notre Dame and Virginia Tech games, they just kind of had weird things happen. Like, they had that game against UNC. They didn't play particularly well. Struggled for 3.5 quarters against UVA. It's just like when this team isn't challenged, they don't step up to the plate. All right, let's get to Jimbo Fisher, because this is the hot topic today, and it could affect Virginia Tech fans. I've got a lot of them listening. So you look at what's happening with Jimbo Fisher. Has he basically accepted this job at Texas A&M? Like, is this thing unofficially official?
Yeah, it is, CJ. And I know, CJ, you, of course, write with me over at Inside the ACC. We got a staff writer over there, Brittany Taylor-Newman. She's got some people that she's close with within the Florida State program. Full disclosure, Brittany is an alum of Florida State, and so she knows what she's talking about when she gets a lead on something like this. And this was something that she, was starting to work on over the weekend. Obviously, it was kind of national news. It was widely discussed that, as soon as Kevin Sumlin was going to be relieved of his duties at Texas A&M, their top target was going to be Jimbo Fisher. And, me personally, seeing Jimbo Fisher's roots to LSU from 2000 to 2006, he served as the offensive coordinator and quarterbacks coach both under Nick Saban and Les Miles. I thought that the time for Jimbo to leave, if he was going to leave, would have been the last couple of years when LSU was entertaining the idea of letting Les Miles go. And I thought that's when Jimbo Fisher would head to, I guess, greener pastures. I don't know. Florida State's a great program. So this kind of took me aback, this whole Texas A&M thing. And, Brittany talked to some people, and she was able to get, pretty solid confirmation that, Jimbo Fisher had a discussion with the athletic department, basically said, look, I know that you guys are considering, building a new football-only practice facility, brand new $60 million facility, but the school had plans in mind to not have that ready until the 2019 or 2020 season. Jimbo Fisher basically went in and said, well, I'm not negotiating for more money. We took care of that the last couple of years with these LSU negotiations. This time I want confirmation that the practice facility is going to be built, and it's going to be built as soon as possible. And from what I understand and from what we learned, it doesn't sound like the Florida State Athletic Department was 1,000% on board with making that happen as soon as possible. They were on board with having it happen in the future, but maybe not as quickly as Jimbo Fisher would have liked. So negotiations between Jimbo Fisher and the school effectively stalled on Monday. And from there hasn't been a ton of discussion other than, it's the expectation now from multiple people within who have been close to the talks between Florida State and Fisher that they're not anticipating that he will be back as head coach of Florida State next season. And that doesn't mean that Florida State's going to let him go, not by any stretch. He has a $40 million buyout.
They can't afford to.
Fires him. Yes, it's a lot of money. So it's $5 to $7 million, at least that's what's rumored, if he takes a job at another school. It's a different kind of buyout that's triggered. So Fisher's not getting fired from Florida State, but it's more likely than not at this point. And I put it close to a 90-95% certainty at this point, unless something drastic changes, that Jimbo Fisher is going to be the next head coach of the Texas A&M Aggies.
Wow. Now, here's something I had heard interesting. I didn't know too much about this. I want to ask you about this. I had heard that Jimbo Fisher recently went through a divorce. His wife is well known throughout the Tallahassee area. Is any of this kind of like a personal situation with him, and he's, that combined with maybe Florida State and the practice facility has led him to whatever happens over the off season and him at Texas A&M, he just isn't going to be back at Florida State regardless. And some of this is because of the personal stuff going on.
Well, it's not the worst theory in the world, CJ, and I've heard that as well. And when you think about it, objectively speaking, the Florida State job is much, much better than the Texas A&M job.
Oh, yeah.
Objectively speaking. Now, subjectively speaking, if there's stuff going on in the background, and nobody knows because nobody's in Jimbo Fisher's head, and it doesn't really seem like anybody that we've spoken to really believes that, Jimbo Fisher has any intention of coming back to Florida State. It sounds like he's kind of been playing this angle like, he's not really sure he wants to be back at Florida State. Nobody can really get in his head and know what's going on, but he's made it pretty clear. Like, the demands that he's asking for are pretty unprecedented. I mean, it's to the point where they're very unrealistic expectations to have a practice facility built as soon as possible when the school has to raise funds for that sort of thing. It's almost like Jimbo knew that, what he was asking for wasn't realistic, and because of that, he would have some leverage and negotiating power with Texas A&M where he could go back and say, hey, I want to be your football coach. How do we make this thing happen? So since Florida State on paper is a better job than Texas A&M, I'm essentially open to any and all theories of why Jimbo Fisher would want to leave Tallahassee and all the success that he's had there in a short time. Well, not even short time. I guess now going on 7 years.
Well, and you look right now at the SEC, it's not really been a hotbed for good coaches. I mean, LSU pops open last year, and Tom Herman, a coach out of Houston, is available. Where's he go? Texas. This year, Chip Kelly's available. He doesn't even interview for Tennessee. And between Florida and UCLA, I think Florida's buying away a better program than UCLA. He takes UCLA. And I think there's something here to the demands in the SEC are just absolutely crazy, and that has pushed a lot of coaches away. But this is an instance where you have a high-profile coach kind of jumping into the toughest division in football, per se, the SEC West, and jumping into Texas A&M.
Yeah, and at Texas A&M, I mean, it's not easy, right? I mean, you have all the money in the world, you got great facilities, you got all that, right? And Jimbo Fisher's done an excellent job recruiting at Florida State, and he'll do an excellent job wherever he goes. I mean, the trade of recruiting travels wherever you are as a football coach. If you're a good recruiter, that will continue throughout the majority of your coaching career, if not for the entire thing. That's not the issue. The issue is that he's going to the SEC West. He's got to compete against Auburn, Alabama, and LSU on a regular basis just to get out of the division and have a chance to play for the SEC championship. Whereas now at Florida State, I mean, on paper, talent-wise, there's not a team in the ACC Atlantic that can compete with Florida State on paper except for Clemson. Clemson's it. Louisville's done a decent job recruiting. NC State's done a decent job recruiting. But other than that, in the ACC Atlantic, it comes down to really one game a year as it stands right now. It's between Florida State and Clemson on paper. And if Florida State can get the job done again in that head-to-head matchup against Clemson and take care of business against everybody else in the division, I mean, they put themselves in an excellent position to go to an ACC championship game and get themselves into the college football playoff. And, at the end of the day, you just want to have the path to get there, because once you get down to the playoff, it's a two-game race. You win your semifinal game, and you have an opportunity in the biggest game of them all in the national championship. So an easier path in the ACC for sure. So it really makes you question what Jimbo's motivations are.
No, I think you're absolutely right. And I look at this, I have a hard time believing this isn't somewhat personal for him. I just don't look at Jimbo and I just don't look at Florida State and view this as not a top 5 job in the country. I mean, this is a program that has a history of being all in on football. They pay incredibly well. I mean, just look at the buyout. It's the biggest buyout in the country, $40 million. I think a lot of this has to be personal. All right, so here's the thing. If Jimbo Fisher goes to Texas A&M, which it sounds like is happening, they're going to have to hire somebody, and a candidate has now emerged that would affect a lot of the local people here. Justin Fuente is now high on FSU's list. Is that correct?
He is. He's high on the list. I don't know if he's the top guy, CJ, to be honest with you. My gut feeling from what I've heard and what I've read, a lot of national people have picked up on this the last couple days. Willie Taggart seems like the guy, right? Oregon's head coach. Now, Willie Taggart today, according to the USA Today, had a contract renegotiated and now put forth to him on the table, where he will be earning $20 million more over the life of the contract if he signs it. So Oregon is re-upping, trying to get ahead of the storm that is, Florida State coming after Willie Taggart effective as soon as Jimbo Fisher signs on with Texas A&M. So I think Willie Taggart's their top target. But
okay, so you got to help me out here, Mike. I don't understand that at all. Willie Taggart lost to Arizona State, who fired their coach. They were smoked by Washington State. They lost by 42 to Stanford. Smoked by UCLA, who fired their coach. Smoked by Washington. And then a close win against a bad Nebraska squad. What is the interest in Willie Taggart?
The recruiting ability, the offense that he runs, and you know what, to be honest with you, CJ, I think that Taggart, quite frankly, is getting a bit of a pass here, based on the fact that the Oregon Ducks were in such turmoil. Mark Helfrich did a fine job there. His message kind of ran stale. He wasn't able to pull recruits. It really started going downhill after they made that appearance in the national championship game a few years ago. It's a rebuild there in Oregon. I mean, let's call it what it is. So I'm not sure his record at Oregon in his first year is really being held against him all that much. Do I think there are better names on the market than Willie Taggart? Yes. Do I think Willie Taggart's a good coach? Yes, I do. Justin Fuente is a guy that's really intriguing because in his second year in Blacksburg, he's got the Hokies in what continues to be a bona fide rebuild. They have an extremely young offense, a defense that's one of the best in the ACC. They're on track to win 10 games in a year where, quite frankly, we weren't sure it was possible given all the turnover they had on offense coming off.
And this is second straight year they're going to win 10 games.
Yeah, the second straight year. I mean, they got the opportunity. I mean, they're 9-3 going into whatever bowl game they end up playing in. I mean, they got that opportunity there. And Fuente's done a great job at Virginia Tech. I think he likes Virginia Tech a lot. He seems to have really embraced Blacksburg. But there are a handful of jobs across the country, CJ, that when they call, you have to listen. Florida State is one of those jobs. Now, whether that means that Fuente actually is intrigued by the job, will listen, is interested in leaving Blacksburg. I mean, I don't get the inkling at this point that he's interested in leaving Blacksburg, but is he high on Florida State's list? Absolutely he is. He definitely is. Is he the first guy they're going to target? Probably not, but don't be surprised if you do hear some rumors about, Justin Fuente being on Florida State's radar. It's already happening. I heard that this afternoon personally. It's happening. He's on their list. Now, whether or not it amounts to an interview or contact with Virginia Tech directly, I mean, we'll find out in the coming days. But, Virginia Tech fans don't have to be worried about Justin Fuente leaving for any other job at the moment because he is so new. He is only 2 years in. But this is one of those jobs that when it comes calling, you at least have to take the phone call.
I threw out a name earlier, and it is a bit of a hot take, but I actually believe there is potential to this happening. This coach, you're going to know who he is. He's had the number one recruiting class for 7 consecutive years until 2018, and all of a sudden it's down at 24th. But I think Nick Saban, if Florida State wanted to say, hey, if they called Nick Saban's agent, they say, hey, we're going to give him $11 million a year to come here. I think they could at least get Saban on the phone. Texas did this a few years ago. Is there any potential at all that Florida State would give Nick Saban a call if they thought he would leave Alabama for that job?
Like I said, I mean, it's one of those jobs that when they call, you have to at least take it, right? And
yeah.
Like you mentioned, I mean, the Texas rumors a couple of years ago, I mean, those were real. Those were legitimate. Texas called. That was a thing. That was real. Nick Saban stayed at Alabama. There was never any real threat to him leaving Alabama, but he took the call. He would take the call at Florida State, CJ. I do think he would. Do I think he's going to leave? No. Do I think he's going to stay at Alabama for the rest of his coaching career? I do. But like I said, I mean, it's one of those jobs where if they come calling, you at least have to entertain it. I think he would. Florida State has money to go after a guy like him. It might be a pretty quick conversation, to be honest with you. It might be a matter of just going to Alabama and saying, hey, we want to speak with them. And Nick Saban's just saying, no, I'm not interested. And then that's it. But who really knows? I mean, they're going to make the effort. They need to at least try to swing for the fences on this one because you only fill that Florida State job every so often.
No, that's absolutely true. And I think if he went to Florida State and he won one or two more championships there, we're not talking about him winning multiple championships at 3 separate schools. I think that takes him from being the best college football coach of all time to arguably one of the best coaches to ever have coached in any sport altogether. And I think that's a different realm of legacy he would look for. Now let's go to Tennessee and what's going on there. So this, I know it upset you, just watching some of your tweets, and you seem maybe not to be too happy with Clay Travis. But so the situation in Tennessee, Greg Schiano comes in, the fans push him out. Have you ever seen anything like this?
In a word, no. No, I mean, I haven't. It's unprecedented, that's for sure. I mean, Clay Travis essentially incited an angry mob to get Greg Schiano basically not hired. I mean, it's hard. I don't even he wasn't fired. What
No.
What was he? They signed a memorandum of understanding. It's unclear whether or not Tennessee actually has to pay Greg Schiano. There was rumors that they would have to pay a buyout even though he never actually coached because he did sign that memo of understanding. What to make of it? I mean, it's a mess. I think there are multiple parties to blame. I mean, I think the Tennessee fan base and their unrealistic expectations. I think the boosters are to blame to a degree. I just don't think that they handled it the correct way either. John Curry, the athletic director, I think he's to blame to a degree for caving under fan expectations. I mean, if Greg Schiano goes there and you're able to, weather the initial storm, so to speak, over, a false report from the Penn State scandal, you're able to weather that initial storm, and Schiano comes in and he turns that program around, then you look like the smartest guy in the room.
Yeah.
Greg Schiano's a great football coach. I mean, don't get me wrong, but he was definitely wronged here. I feel bad for him. I think the fan base really messed this up because if you're a coach looking at Tennessee, and look, CJ, we've seen this over the last few days with some big names giving Tennessee a look. If you had options on the table other than Tennessee after seeing how they treated Greg Schiano, why wouldn't you look elsewhere before looking at Tennessee? I mean, Tennessee has to move down a couple of rungs in your book. Even though, they have a great tradition, they have, a proud tradition, they have all the facilities you want, a bunch of money to back them up. But, I think there are a couple jobs I'd rather have than the Tennessee job at this point in time.
Oh, no, I completely agree with that. And, the funny thing about this is, Justin Fuente was on their radar at one point. There's been nothing about Justin Fuente even interviewing for that job. And the situation with Jeff Brom, he was about 6th on their list. They've now completely blown that up. I think this is a combination of fans completely overreacting, and I think now an incredibly incompetent AD in John Curry. All right, ACC championship game. Miami, Clemson. I honestly think what we've seen from Miami, I think we've seen their best days. I think Clemson's going to run the floor with them this weekend, and I think Clemson's going to beat them in the same fashion they beat South Carolina. You look at this game, what do you see matchup-wise? Where do you see this one going?
Well, before I even get into the matchup part of this, CJ, I mean, Miami just lost one of their top receivers, Amon Richards, this afternoon. He tore his meniscus in practice, and he's out for the season. The school just announced within the last hour or so.
Oh, my gosh.
That's a pretty big loss. He's one of Malik Rozier's top targets. He's the security blanket, so to speak, in the passing game. He's had a really solid sophomore year for the Hurricanes, so that's a big loss. Is it a loss to the point where it decides the football game? No, not in my opinion. I think Clemson's the better team here. Miami hasn't seen a defense quite like Clemson's. I think the closest that they've seen to it is either Virginia Tech or Notre Dame. But I think Clemson's defense is on a much better level than either of those two programs. You could even point to Florida State's defense, but Florida State's defense, they struggled all year because the offense struggled and they got tired. They dealt with injuries as well. So Clemson's the best defense Miami has faced. I think, looking at Malik Rozier last week in the game against Pittsburgh, he missed a lot of throws, particularly deep down the field. If he even completes like 2 or 3 of those throws, I think we're looking at a much different outcome in that football game. I think Miami has an opportunity. I think they have the athletes to hang with Clemson. I think they'll be ready to play because Miami does get up for a big game. But I'll tell you what, CJ, the one thing we don't know about Miami, and we're still yet to figure it out this year, is how good are they on the road, actually, right? Like, how good
this is a good point.
Game? Like, they have been great at home against big teams. Now they're playing a big team on neutral site. Let's call it a road game because it basically is. Clemson always travels well to the.
Oh, it's in Charlotte.
It's in Charlotte. It's a chip shot drive from where Clemson's at in South Carolina. It's not bad at all. They're going to travel well. They'll have a lot of fans there. It's a bona fide road game for Miami, and how will they handle that atmosphere? I see Clemson winning this football game. I think there's too much to overcome for Miami here. I'm not sure Miami's offense has enough ways to score on this really talented Clemson defense. Yeah. Miami has struggled running the ball over the last few weeks for Travis Homer. I think that's going to come back to haunt them in a game where, you really have to take pressure off a quarterback like Malik Rozier. Rozier's been inaccurate as well. Clemson's starting to click on all cylinders too. So I'm going to take Clemson to win this game. I think Miami hangs around a bit, but I wouldn't be surprised if Clemson opens this thing up and wins by like 10 to 14 points.
Oh, no, that's exactly where I think this one's going. Now, let's say for whatever reason, Miami, they come out of Rozier. By the way, he's been a roller coaster, and that's the reason I don't like picking them. Sometimes he's great, sometimes he's just completely awful. Let's say he plays great. Let's say Miami wins this one, and it's close. It's like 31-30, last-second field goal to win it. If Clemson loses in that fashion, can they still get into the playoff? Because now they're ranked number 1, so they would have to fall 3+ spots to not get in.
It's a good question. I think, to be honest with you, I think some of it hinges on what happens in the SEC championship game. I think the best thing to happen to Clemson in the SEC championship game is for Auburn to win.
Yeah.
Because I think at that point, if Clemson loses and Auburn wins, it's going to be tough to put 2-loss Auburn in over 2-loss Clemson when Clemson has won a head-to-head game over Auburn. But then you get into the weeds. Like, does a conference championship actually matter this year, right? Does a 2-loss conference champion matter? It didn't matter last year with the Big Ten, with the Penn State and Ohio State debacle. I call it a debacle because that's really what it was. The whole thing was a mess. Nobody really knew what was required to get into the playoff. We get into the weeds with that again. And I don't know the answer to that, CJ. I think it's tough to put Clemson in with 2 losses and not being a conference champion when they lost a game to Syracuse. But this entire time, Clemson, to a degree, has been given a pass in that game on the road because it was a short week. Kelly Bryant was hurt.
By the way, like Syracuse, people don't realize this who've never been up there. Like, I've been in the Carrier Dome. That is a weird place to be, especially for a football game. Like, it's a dome atmosphere, the only one in FBS college football besides Idaho. It's just a weird place to play. Friday night, Kelly Bryant gets injured. I watched that game. It's not like Clemson got blown out. If that game's 27-24 in favor of Clemson, nobody's talking about it.
And the one thing that a lot of people are overlooking, too, everybody's talking about the Kelly Bryant injury, but even a bigger deal in that game was the fact that Clemson was without their starting kicker, Greg Hoigel, for the first time all year. And that's the biggest thing. Clemson has been able to adapt. They've broken in their new kicker. But when your starting kicker, a 4-year starter, tears his ACL in practice, and you're left scrambling on a short week trying to find a place kicker, and you start getting into a game of field goals on the road, dim lighting, really loud, weird atmosphere at the Carrier Dome, a tough place to play, an offense that can score on you. Syracuse had a rough end of the year because Eric Dungy was hurt at quarterback, but, that's a team that's explosive on offense. It had all the makings of an upset once it took place. It was surprising, CJ, but it wasn't all that surprising considering the elements that Clemson was up against. Now, you'll have the detractors saying, well, Clemson has a lot more talent than Syracuse, and they should have won the game. And, to that I agree with. But
right.
You can't outright dismiss the fact that you lose your starting field goal kicker, a 4-year starter, on a short week. And, Kelly Bryant's dealing with a bum ankle. He gets concussed. He's knocked out of the game. That stuff adds up, and especially at key positions, that's sometimes too much to overcome, especially on the road.
Okay, so let's end with this. Let's get to our college football playoff predictions. Mine are, I think Clemson wins this weekend, so I think they get in at number 1. I'm going to take Auburn to beat Georgia. That, to me, is a coin flip game. I have no idea who wins, but I'm going to take Auburn. I think Oklahoma beats TCU, so they're in. So that really leaves up the fourth spot up for discussion. I don't think Wisconsin wins this weekend, so I don't think they get in. I've got Alabama sliding back into that number 4 spot, and so I think we're going to get Clemson, Alabama in the first round, and Auburn and Oklahoma in the other game. What's your prediction with this?
Man, I think Clemson wins. I do. I think Oklahoma wins the Big 12. Like you said, the SEC championship is a coin flip. Auburn blitzed Georgia a few weeks ago. That was a game where they really weren't ready to go. Georgia, that's a tough atmosphere for a freshman quarterback. Jake Fromm's been fantastic. That's a tough place to go in and play and win.
Yeah. Well, now Auburn's without their running back for this game. Well, supposedly without their running back for this game, so that makes it tough. And I just think a bunch of college kids getting blown out like that, they're going to be super motivated going into this one.
For sure. I mean, no Kerryon Johnson. I mean, if that ends up being the case, it's going to be tough for Auburn to figure out ways to score. In addition to that, CJ, it's really tough to beat the same team twice in a season. It really is at the college level when you're playing with kids who thrive off of energy, the energy and the momentum swings in a football game more than I think any other sport. I'm going to take, I don't know. I'm going to take Georgia. Like I said, it's a coin flip game. I'm going with Georgia based solely off the fact it's hard to beat the same team twice. Regardless, I think the SEC champion is in and is sitting at number 2. So I think it's Clemson plus the SEC championship. Let's call it Georgia. Oklahoma at 3. I agree with you. I think Ohio State beats Wisconsin, but a lot of that it's hanging in the balance. I mean, if JT Barrett plays and he's healthy and can go a full 4 quarters, I think Ohio State wins. But if he's not healthy, it's going to be tough. But as far as who the 4th team is in the playoff, I'm with you. I think the committee puts Alabama in. It's tough to do it when looking at their resume, but the eye test, which nobody likes to admit, CJ, but when you look at the eye test, that matters to a degree. And it's
it does.
It's hard to argue in watching Alabama play that they're not one of the best 4 teams in the country. And they lost a game last week in the Iron Bowl to Auburn that I think almost any team in the country would have lost the way that Auburn was playing, and especially getting that game at home. That was a really tough ask for even a team like Alabama, as good as they've been. So Alabama hasn't played their best football in the last month or so. I think their best football is probably played in September and October. But, I do think they're one of the best 4 teams in the country, and fair or not, I think they'll have an opportunity, especially if Ohio State ends up beating Wisconsin in the Big Ten championship game.
Well, and the thing a lot of people forget about is, Alabama went into the Auburn game without a bunch of their linebackers. So the playoffs, you're going to get about 3.5 weeks in between last week. Well, actually, probably 4.5 between last week, Alabama's last game, and that first playoff game. That gives them plenty of time to heal up, and you're going to get an Alabama team at full strength. The only way I don't see them getting in is if Miami were to beat Clemson, and then Clemson somehow stays in the playoff. In that scenario, I think maybe Alabama gets left out, but I think Alabama's in.
And real quick, CJ. I mean, a lot of people are talking about the discussion between Ohio State and Alabama, and Ohio State has the conference championship with 2 losses. Shouldn't they get in over Alabama? I mean, in my opinion, no. The Big Ten overall, I thought was pretty weak this year. Number 1, and number 2, I can't definitively say that Ohio State, who has gotten blown out twice by Iowa and Oklahoma, once at home, once on the road. I can't definitively say that a team that got blown out twice is better than one-loss Alabama, who lost a road game to Auburn.
Thank you.
Final game of the year. I have trouble reconciling that.
Thank you.
So I don't think you can be one of the 4 best teams in the country if you get blown out twice, and those are your 2 losses. I don't care what conference you win.
Now, I look at Wisconsin. I'm so pissed about this, Mike. Wisconsin's undefeated because they manufacture their way to an undefeated season. They've played 1 top 50 offense, and it's Florida Atlantic. I look at that, I think it's absolutely pathetic. Any of these top 8 teams with that schedule would have gone undefeated. I would, even if they win against Ohio State's been such a roller coaster team this year. I wouldn't put Wisconsin in. Am I crazy for that?
No, I mean I don't. I don't think you're crazy. I mean, one of the things that I've argued, to be honest with you, and this is before all the craziness happened with Notre Dame losing a couple times down the stretch, and all the upsets that happened over the last few weeks. I thought that there was an opportunity there a few weeks ago where if Wisconsin went undefeated and won the Big Ten, there was a chance that they wouldn't get in the playoff. I really did believe that, and it's not based on anything other than, like, I can't definitively look at Wisconsin, at least at that time. I can now, but at that time I couldn't definitively look at Wisconsin and say they went undefeated in the weakest division, arguably in the country, in any conference. They went undefeated playing that division for 6 or 7 of their games in the season. They went undefeated against that schedule and won a weak Big Ten, and because of that, I should reward them and say they're one of the 4 best teams. I'll tell you what, CJ, at the end of the day, conference championships be damned. I'm picking the 4 best teams to get into the playoffs.
Hey, that's what I'm talking about. That's it.
And if it's a weak conference and you win the conference, congratulations on winning your conference, but if you're not one of the 4 best teams, in my opinion, I don't think you should get in. And the Big Ten's been weak this year, and I think Wisconsin obviously gets in now if they win the Big Ten, but I don't think it was a certainty at least all year. I mean, I thought a few weeks ago there was an opportunity there where Wisconsin could go undefeated, and if a couple things fell the way I expected them to, it didn't end up happening, but if a couple things fell a certain way, I thought Wisconsin might end up being snubbed.
Hey, this has been fantastic. I thought you were going to come out here and I think you're going to yell at me about Saban, yell at me about Wisconsin, yell at me about Miami, but we've been right on the money on every single thing tonight. Hey, Mike, we've had you on for about 30 minutes, which is a little bit longer than I anticipated, but I really appreciate you coming on. And anybody listening, InsideTheACC.com. Mike wrote a fantastic article about Florida State. You can find out more information about the Jimbo Fisher situation as well. Mike, thanks for being on tonight.
All right, thanks, DJ. Appreciate it, man.
All right. That was Mike McDaniel from Inside the ACC. Really appreciate him coming on. He was absolutely fantastic. All right, we're going to end the podcast with one big thing that happened yesterday. So LeBron James, for the first time in his career, was ejected from a game last night. And everybody's freaking out. Oh my gosh, LeBron went crazy at a referee. He's lost it. I have said, I don't know how many times on this podcast, college basketball is played February through March, and the NBA is played March through June. I don't get nervous. I don't overreact about anything related to basketball until after the new year. It's still November. Give these things time. 3 weeks ago, everybody was telling me the Cavs weren't going to make playoffs in the Eastern Conference. The Cavs are right now back to 3rd in the conference. They're going to end up winning the conference and head back to the NBA playoffs. I don't care about the Celtics. They've got no way to stop LeBron offensively. We've got a long way to go in the season. Here's what happened last night. The score, it was late in the third quarter. The score was 93-70 in favor of the Cavs. I don't think he wanted to play the rest of the game. He went up for a shot. The shot didn't go in. The ref called maybe a fairly bad call. And then LeBron James completely overreacted to the call. This is, by the way, out of character for LeBron to argue with a call like that. Now, he's argued with calls in the past, but to argue with a call like that, he's never overreacted like that before. And anytime somebody acts completely out of character, make a note and ask yourself, why would they do this? The game's put away. LeBron James last year took a lot of crap for taking rest. This year he's played in a lot of games. He's played a lot of minutes. He doesn't want to play another minute in this one. The second he got an opportunity to, he completely overreacted to get a reaction from the refs and try and get tossed from that game. I absolutely believe that. I don't think there's any issues with LeBron, with the locker room there. He's fine. It's not a big deal. Probably, honestly, won't be the first time it happens this season. I think LeBron might get thrown out of a couple more games during the regular season. But watch what happens during the playoffs. He'll get his act together. He'll be much more mature about the calls, and everything will be joyous, and the Cavs will be right back in the NBA Finals where they belong. It's where people overreact, and I am the voice of reason. You listen to me because I'm the one who comes on and gives you the voice of reason. Okay. Saturday 6, we'll be back 6 a.m. I went 5-1 this past weekend, by the way. It's the best betting podcast available to you. So if you like football, if you like betting on games, this is where you go. We take the 6 best football games. I guarantee you we're going to be all in on college this weekend, and we predict them against the spread. We give you a full preview. We'll give you a fantasy play in the NFL as well that you guys can use. We've been very, very good this season. I'm 5-1 this past week. A couple weeks ago, I was 6-0. So my picks have been red hot. Chris doesn't like it. May actually explain why he's not here tonight. Might have to get on to him about that. All right, I want to thank you guys for listening to our podcast tonight. Mike McDaniel was great. Appreciate him coming on.
You like that?
I do like that. Thank you, Kirk Cousins. We were jam-packed. Lots of different things going on. Again, make sure you go to cjsweatshow.com. Always put news up there. I write a couple articles every once in a while up there as well. We will have the Saturday 6 picks and a lot more available to you on the website, cjsweatshow.com. You can go to InsideTheACC.com for all of the ACC action. There is a lot of stuff going on with Jimbo Fisher. You want to be part of that website and that experience if you're on the interwebs, the internet, as it were. And also find us on Twitter, twitter.com/CJ You can go there for all of our Twitterings and everything related to that. Want to appreciate you guys joining us. Make sure to share it with your friends. This is the CJ Sweat Show. Have a good night.
Watch me hit the gray button.